morning, it is now 6 a.m. and it's drizzling outside. I am going to share with you what I've read in the month of November. The first book that I read was Normal People by Sally Rooney, which is a contemporary novel, and I rated 2 stars. I feel like for this book you either get it and you like it, or you don't get it like myself and you hate it. Like, how should I put this? I feel like book Normal People is like a bathrobe. And what is a bathrobe? It is a towel, but not really a towel because you can also wear it. It is like an item of clothing, but not really an item of clothing because you won't wear it to school or to work. So a bathrobe is basically pointless. I could use a bathrobe after a shower, but then I'd be like, well, now that my body's dry, why don't I just change to my pajamas? So why would I even bother using a bathrobe in the first place? Like, seriously, if you have clothes to wear after you shower and if you've got a towel, why would you buy a bathrobe? I don't know what that roundabout bathrobe is about, but what I'm trying to say is that this book is quite pointless. I think the biggest problem, or one of the problems with this book, is that it does not have a story whatsoever. It is character driven, but the characters to me are not relatable in the slightest, which makes this book quite a forgettable one. Like, in this book we follow two main characters, Mary and Connell. In the last year of high school, they hook up and then they not hook up, and then they hook up again and they not hook up again. It just goes over and over. And the lack of story makes this book really boring. While you may say this is a literary novel, it is more about the writing and the themes that the author is trying to portray. Well, let's first talk about the writing. I think the narrative is really plain and flat, to say the best. Like, I can read you something from the book. Mary Ann goes inside and comes back out again with another bottle of sparkling wine and a bottle of red. Neil starts unwrapping the wire on the first bottle and Mary Ann hands Connell a corkscrew. Peggy starts clearing people's plates. Conan peels the foil from the top of a bottle as Jamie leans over and says something to Mary Ann. He sinks the screw into the cork and twists it downwards. Peggy takes his plate away and stacks it with the others. Like, around 30 to 40% of the book is just writing like this, sometimes mingled with bursts of fancy words just to impress. And also, too much sex. Like, literally every 5 to 10 pages I can see people having sex, and it's really painful and cringy to read because of the sex-related violence. So I don't like the writing at all. And now let's talk about the themes. So Sally Rooney is trying to hit that emotional poignancy by exploring the themes of first love, class differences, childhood trauma / abusive family, and mental illnesses. I do appreciate the discussions on class differences, and that's the reason why this book is a 2 star, not a 1 star, but she handles the last 2 themes really terribly. So in this book, Mary Ann is from a wealthy and abusive family, and Connell is from a working class background and has depression and anxiety, and both characters are having trouble dealing with their own problems, which is quite realistic. But what really disgusts me is that Sally Rooney romanticizes their difficulties. For example, being alienated at school is synonymous with being cool, and seeking sadomasochistic relationships is inevitable or understandable if you come from an abusive family. Because of the mental illnesses and the traumas these characters are experiencing, I like to see how, the characters overcome these problems, or how they try to overcome these problems, because it shows the growth in these characters. And Sally Rooney just makes Connell depressed all of a sudden out of nowhere, just so that the readers can feel bad for him. Like, if this is not romanticizing mental illnesses, what is? Overall, I just feel like Sally Rooney is too busy telling you how different, how special, how smart the 2 main characters are, that they smoke, they make languid movements, they care a lot about politics, and also she's trying to be deep by including things like childhood trauma, class differences, and mental illnesses in a book that is less than 300 pages. So it just ends up being all over the place. I just don't like this book. So no more Sally Rooney books for me, and no more bathrobes. The next book, fortunately, is a 5-star read, and I have no other words to describe it other than that I adored it. And it is The Tenant Welfare Hall by Anne Bronte. And I finally understand why people say this is their favorite Bronte book, because it certainly has become mine. Previously it was Charlotte Bronte's Jane Eyre. So this book is narrated by Gilbert, who falls in love with the mysterious Mrs. Graham, who comes to live at this old house called the Welfare Hall. And everyone in the village is gossiping about her regarding her past, because nobody knows who she is, and she claims to be a widow, but she never mentions her deceased husband. And later, Gilbert and Miss Graham become friends, and Miss Graham gives him her diary, which reveals that she is actually not a widow. She is still married to Mr. Huntington, but being a very abusive relationship, she couldn't bear her life and ended up running away from her husband to the Welfare Hall to escape this horrible marriage. And she brought her son with her, and she changed her name from Mrs. Huntington to Mr. Graham, which is her mother's maiden name. The form of this book is really interesting because the narrative of Gilbert is told through his letters to his friend. And the book was published in 3 volumes, and the diary starts in the first volume, is the whole of the second volume, and is almost half of the 3rd volume. And when I was reading this long diary, which documents how terribly Mr. Huntington treats his wife, I found myself gritting my teeth and enduring along with Mrs. Graham. Like, the writing is so real and so raw, and the fact that a large portion of this book is this diary tells you how long Mrs. Graham has been trapped inside of this abusive relationship. There's definitely more realism in this book than there's romanticism. For example, Mrs. Graham is misled by the ideas of romantic love and that she can repair her husband's misconduct, but the marriage turns out to be a failure. And essentially, throughout this book, Anne Bronte is trying to debunk the myth of women as redemptive agents who can improve the morals of her husband or her menfolk. And this book is also a grating criticism of the marital rights women had at that time. And if you look at the timeline, you can actually see that marriage reform came after the publication of this book, so this book is influential. I should also add that this book, upon its initial publication, achieved great success. But one of the reasons why Anne Bronte is not as well known as her 2 sisters, Emily and Charlotte, is because Charlotte prevented the republication of the book in England from 1849, which is the year Anne Bronte passed away, to 1854. Some people say it's because Charlotte was jealous of Anne, other people say it wasn't, but whatever the reason is, I just want you to keep this in mind when you read books by the Brontes. Moving on, I read Moomin Valley in November, which I rated 4 stars. In case you don't know, the whole Moomin universe, the Moomin land, is created by the Finnish author and illustrator Tove Jansson. There's a TV series of the Moomins, and there's also a book series which consists of 9 books. This is the last one in the series. I am reading them out of order, which is fine, I believe. I picked this one up because it was November last month. This is a special book in the series because the Moomins are actually missing from it. They are out traveling, and instead we get to see all these other creatures living around the Moomin Valley who feel ill at ease in their own company. This is Villajong, this is Snufkin, and this is Toft. There are 6 creatures, and they all believe that Moomin Valley is the place for them to go in order to be cheerful again. But the Moomins are nowhere to be found, and they realize that they need to solve their problems on their own. I think this is a comforting little book for both children and adults, and it is illustrated, and it makes you appreciate the transition from autumn to winter, which is the most sentimental and melancholy time of the year. And I'll read you my favorite quote from the book. The quiet transition from autumn to winter. The quiet transition from autumn to winter is not a bad time at all. It's a time for protecting and securing things, and for making sure you've got in as many supplies as you can. It's nice to gather together everything you possess as close to you as possible, to store up your warmth and your thoughts and burrow yourself into a deep pool inside, a core of safety where you can defend what is important and precious and your very own. Then the cold and the storms and the darkness can do their worst. They can grope their way up the walls looking for a way in, but they won't find one. Everything is shut, and you sit inside, loving your warmth and your solitude, for you've had foresight. So that is the Moomin Valley in November. The next book that I read is a classic young adult book, which is not The Catcher in the Rye, if that's what you're thinking. It's The Outsiders by S.E. Hinton, and she wrote this book when she was only 16, so that's impressive. And I gave it 4 stars, and I think if I ever reread this book, I may bump it up a star, because I think although it's a coming-of-age story, we can all learn something from the teenagers in the book. So this book is about the 2 weeks in the life of a 14-year-old boy called Pony Boy, and he belongs to a gang where everyone is a greaser because they all grow their hair long and they wear lots of hair oil. And the greasers are the poor kids from the east side. They are like degenerates, outlaws. Whereas the Sogs, which is short for the socials, are the rich kids from the west side. And the Sogs like to jump on the greasers when they are alone, so the greasers look after each other in the best way possible. And some greasers have very weak family connections, so the gang is all they have, and they kind of see this gang as their surrogate family. So in the eyes of Penny Boy, who grows up on the street and hasn't seen much of the world, he believes that there are only 2 kinds of people in the world, the Sogs and the greasers, and he believes that they will never be able to understand each each other. But his perception of the boundary between the two gangs starts to change as he gets to know a girl who is the girlfriend of someone from the Sox. Both the girl and Pennyboy like to watch the sunset, and it occurs to Pennyboy that maybe the two gangs are not that different after all because the sunset they watch is the same one. But the real turning point of the story comes when a greaser accidentally kills a social, and Pennyboy and that greaser go into hiding because they were together when the murder took place. And that further leads to a turn of events which makes Pennyboy realize that the labels like the social and the greaser does not define a person. And I'll borrow a quote from the book. Greaser didn't have anything to do with it. My buddy over there wouldn't have done it. Maybe you would have done the same thing. Maybe a friend of yours wouldn't have. It is the individual. And I think this is one of the core themes of the book because in crafting the protagonist Pennyboy, the author is also playing off with our preconceived notion of what an outlaw is. Yes, Pennyboy is a greaser, but he is also a very smart boy. He brings home very good grades and he loves reading. He rhapsodizes over films. So you can see the depth of the character. And one more thing that I think is so great but also very sad about this book is Pennyboy's incipient understanding that his own personal growth, the thing about the label in a person, is not enough to effect widespread change. Because at the end of the day, a greaser is still a greaser, whereas the socials will always remain the lucky ones. And it is really sad because just imagine that you're a teenager, and the moment that you realize that the world is much, much bigger than you are, it is that much difficult to transform. So yeah, read this book, guys. Last book, Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, a psychiatrist and an Auschwitz concentration camp survivor. So I think I'm not gonna talk about the Holocaust because I think I'm gonna bore many people. So instead, I'm gonna tell you how this book can get you to think about the meaning of life. So it tells you that you should not be the one to ask what is the meaning of life, but instead you're the one who is asked by life. You're the one who is questioned hourly and daily, and you can only respond to life by being reasonable through the choices you make on a daily basis. And the book raises a really interesting proposal, which is that live as if you were living already for the second time and as if you had acted the first time as wrongly as you are about to act now. And now what exactly do you want to do? And he connects this kind of idea to his prison life at the concentration camp. He says that even in that kind of situation where you have nothing to choose but to suffer, at least you should make something positive of it. You should, not suffer in vain. Your suffering should not be worthless. And there are two quotes that I want to share with you. The first one is about suffering. He says that when a man finds out it is his destiny to suffer, he will have to accept his suffering as his task, his single and unique task. We will have to acknowledge the fact that even in suffering, he is unique and alone in the universe. No one can relieve him of his suffering or suffer in his place. His unique opportunity lies in the way in which he bears his burden. And the second one is about the choices. And there were always choices to make. Every day, every hour, offer the opportunity to make a decision. A decision which determined whether you would or would not submit to those powers which threatened to rob you of your very self, your inner freedom, which determined whether or not you would become the plaything of circumstance, renouncing freedom and dignity to become molded into the form of the typical inmate. And in the book, he also draws reference from Nietzsche, who says that he who has a why to live for can bear with almost anyhow. And a lot of times when I was reading the book, I couldn't help but agree with what he said. I think this book is really empowering. And maybe I am overgeneralizing here, but many millennials, myself included, are kind of struggling to find the meaning of life because we are constantly distracted by social media. And the great thing about this book is that although it does not tell you what the meaning of life is, because the answer is going to vary from person to person, it is a useful tool to guide you, to get you to think on the right path. And I would recommend it to anyone. So if you're watching this, definitely get your hand on this book and give it a read. 5 out of 5. So these are all I have, and it just stopped raining, so I'm gonna take a walk. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in my next one. Ciao!